The only answer the woman would give was, "Much more than I want to, girl, if I can do anything at all. But I made the boy promises, and I keep my promises. I hope he remembers that." Delivered in a voice like ice, it was not a reply to inspire confidence.
Rand woke in
Hey,
darkness
Fire,
and
how you
pain,
doing?
lying on his back. His gloves were gone. He could feel a rough pallet beneath him. They had taken his boots, too. His gloves were gone. They knew who he was. Carefully, he sat up. His face felt bruised, and every muscle in his body hurt as if he had been beaten. But nothing seemed to be broken. Standing slowly, he felt his way along the stone wall beside the pallet, reaching a corner almost immediately, and then a door covered with rough iron straps.
Share this out real quick.
In the darkness, his fingers traced a small flap, but he could not push it open. No hint of light seeped in around its edges. Inside his head, Luce Theron began to pant. Rand moved on, feeling his way, the floor stones cold beneath his bare feet. The next corner came almost immediately, and then a third, where his toes struck something that rattled on the stone floor. Keeping one hand on the wall, he bent and found a wooden bucket. He left it there and made himself complete the circuit, all the way back to the iron door. All the way. He was inside a black box 3 paces long and just over 2 paces wide. Raising one hand, he found the stone ceiling less than a foot above his head. Closed in, Luce Theron panted hoarsely. The box again. When those women put us in the box. We have to get out, he howled. We have to get out! Ignoring the screaming voice in his head, Rand backed away from the door until he thought he was in the center of the cell, then lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the floor. He was as far from the walls as he could put himself, and in the dark he tried to imagine them farther away, but it seemed that if he reached out, he would not have to straighten his arm fully to touch stone. He could feel himself trembling, as if it were someone else's body, shaking uncontrollably. The walls seemed just beside him, the ceiling right over his head. He had to fight this, or he would be as mad as Luce Theron by the time anyone came to let him out. They would have to let him out eventually, if only to hand him over to whoever Elaida sent. How many months for a message to reach Tar Valon and Elaida's emissaries to return? If they were sisters loyal to Elaida closer than Tar Valon, it might happen sooner. Horror added to his shivers as he realized that he was hoping those sisters were closer, were in the city already, so they could take him out of this box. I will not surrender, he shouted. I will be as hard as I need to be. In that confined space, his voice boomed like thunder. Moraine had died because he was not hard enough to do what had to be done. Her name always headed the list engraved on his brain, the women who had died because of him. Moraine Dunkernet. Every name on that list brought anguish that forget the chains of his body, forget the stone walls just beyond his fingertips. Poliver Saigon, who died because he had stripped her of everything she valued. Leah, Maiden of the Spear, of the Kosaita Charim, who died at his own hands because she followed him to Shara Lobeth. Jendalin, a maiden of the Cold Peak Miagoma, who died because she wanted the honor of guarding his door. He had to be hard. One by one, he summoned up the names on that long list, patiently forging his soul in the fires of pain.
Preparation took longer than Cadsuane had hoped, largely because she had to impress on various people that a grand rescue in the best traditions of Gleemen's tales was out of the question, so it was night before she found herself walking along the lamplit corridors of the Hall of the Councils. Walking sedately, not hurrying. Hurry, and people assumed that you were anxious, that they had the upper hand. If ever in her life she had needed to keep the upper hand from the start, it was tonight. The corridors should have been empty at this hour, but today's events had changed the normal course of things. Blue-coated clerks were scurrying everywhere, sometimes pausing to gape at her companions. Quite possibly they had never seen Four Eyes Sedai at once. She was not willing to allow Nynaeve that title until she took the 3 oaths, and today's commotion would have added to their confusion at the sight. The 3 men bringing up the rear earned almost as many stares, though. The clerks might not know the meaning of their black coats or the pins on their high collars, but it was very unlikely any of those clerks had ever seen 3 men wearing swords in these hallways. In any case, with a little luck, no one would go running to inform Elise, who was coming to break in on the councils sitting in closed session. It was a pity she could not have brought the men by themselves, but even Daigyan had displayed backbone at the suggestion. A great pity that all of her companions were not displaying the composure showed by Maurice and the other 2 sisters. "This will never work," Nynaeve grumbled, for perhaps the 10th time since leaving the Heights. "We should strike hard from the start." "We should have moved faster," Min muttered darkly. "I can feel him changing. If he was a stone before, he's iron now. Light, what are they doing to him?" Along only because she was a link to the boy, she had been unceasing with her reports, each bleaker than the last. Cadsuane had not told her what the cells were like. Not when the girl had broken down, just telling her what the sisters who kidnapped the boy had done to him. Cadsuane sighed. A ragtag army she had assembled, but even a makeshift army needed discipline, especially with the battle just ahead. It would have been worse had she not forced the Seafolk women to remain behind. "I can do this without either of you if need be," she said firmly. "No, don't say anything, Nynaeve. Maurice or Coriel can wear that belt as well as you. So if you children do not stop whining, I will have Olivia take you back to the Heights and give you something to whine about." That was the only reason she had brought the strange wilder. Olivia had a tendency to become very mild-mannered around those she could not stare down, but she stared very fiercely at those 2 chattering magpies. Their heads swiveled toward the golden-haired woman as one, and the magpies fell blessedly silent. Silent, yet hardly accepting. Min could grind her teeth all she wanted, but Nynaeve's sullen glower irritated Cadsuane. The girl had good material in her, but her training had been cut far too short. Her ability with healing was little short of miraculous. Her ability with almost anything else, dismal. And she had not been put through the lessons that what must be endured could be endured. In truth, Cadsuane sympathized with her. Somewhat. It was a lesson not everyone could learn in the tower. She herself, full of pride in her new shawl and her own strength, had been taught by a near-toothless wilder at a farm in the heart of the Black Hills. Oh, it was a very ragtag little army she had gathered to try standing farm matting on its head. Clerks and messengers half-filled the columned anteroom to the council's chamber, but they were, after all, only clerks and messengers. The clerks hesitated in officious puzzlement, each waiting for another to speak first, but the red-coated messengers, who knew it was not their place to say anything, backed across the blue floor tiles to the sides of the room, and the clerks parted in front of her, none quite daring to be the first to open his mouth. Even so, she heard a collective gasp when she opened one of the tall doors carved with the hand and sword. The council's chamber was not large. 4 mirrored stand lamps sufficed to light it, and a large Tyran carpet in red and blue and gold almost covered the floor tiles. A wide marble fireplace on one side of the room made a fair job of warming the air, though the glass doors leading to the colonnade outside rattled in the night wind, loud enough to drown the ticking of the tall, gilded Ilianer clock on the mantel. 13 carved and gilded chairs, very nearly thrones, made an arc facing the door, all occupied by worried-looking women. Elise, at the head of the arc, frowned when she saw Cadsuane lead her little parade into the chamber. "This session is closed, Aes Sedai," she said, at once formal and cold. "We may ask you to speak to us later, but
Roll a couple
you know who you
road
have in the
straight
cells," Cadsuane cut in. It was not a question, but Elise tried to bluff her way past. "A number of men, I believe. Public drunkards, various foreigners arrested for fighting or stealing, A man from the borderlands taken just today who may have murdered 3 men. I do not keep a personal record of arrests, Cadsuane said I. Nynaeve drew a deep breath at mention of a man taken for murder, and her eyes glittered dangerously, but at least the child had sense enough to keep her mouth shut. So you will try to conceal that you hold the Dragon Reborn, Cadsuane said quietly. She had hoped fervently, that Varen's spade work would make them back away from this. Perhaps it could still be done simply, though. I can take him off your hands. I have faced more than 20 men who could channel over the years. He holds no fears for me. We do thank you for the offer, Elias replied smoothly. But we prefer to communicate with Tarvalon first. To negotiate his price, she meant. Well, what had to be, had to be. Do you mind telling us how you learned? Cadsuane broke in again. Perhaps I should have mentioned earlier. These men behind me are Ashaman. The 3 stepped forward then as they had been instructed, and she had to admit they gave a dangerous appearance. Grizzled Dahmer looked a graying bear with sore teeth. Pretty Jahar seemed a dark, sleek leopard, and Eben's unblinking gaze was particularly ominous coming from that youthful face. They certainly had their effect on the councils. Some simply shifted in their chairs as if to draw back, but Cyprian let her mouth fall open, unfortunate with her protruding teeth. Sebane, her hair as gray as Cadsuane's, sagged back in her chair and began fanning herself with a slender hand, while Kumir's mouth twisted, as if she might vomit. Elias was made of sterner stuff, though she pressed both hands tight against her midriff. I told you once that Ashaman were free to visit so long as they obeyed the law. We have no fear of Ashaman, Cadsuane, though I must say I'm surprised to see you in their company, particularly in view of the offer you have just made. So, she was plain Cadsuane now, was she? Still, she regretted the necessity to break Elias. She led Farmading well, but she might never recover from tonight. Are you forgetting what else happened today, Elias? Someone channeled inside the city. Again, councils shifted, and worried frowns creased more than one forehead. An aberration. Coolness was gone from Elias's voice, replaced by anger and maybe a touch of fear. Her eyes shone darkly. Perhaps the Guardians were in error. No one who was questioned saw anything to suggest even what we think is perfect can have flaws, Elias. Cadsuane drew on her own well, taking in Saidar in a measured amount. She had practice. The little golden hummingbird could not hold near so much as Nynaeve's belt. Flaws can pass unnoticed for centuries before they are found. The flow of air she wove was just enough to lift the gem-encrusted coronet from Elias's head and set it on the carpet in front of the woman's feet. Once they are found, however, it seems that anyone who looks can find them. 13 sets of shocked eyes stared at the coronet. One and all, the council seemed frozen, barely breathing. Not so much a flaw as a barn door, seems to me, Dahmer announced. I think it's prettier on your head. The glow of the power suddenly shone around Nynaeve, and the coronet flew toward Elias, slowing at the last instant, so that it settled above her bloodless face, rather than cracking her head. The light of Saidar did not vanish from the girl, though. Well, let her drain her well. Will, Elias swallowed, but when she went on, her voice still cracked. Will it be sufficient if we release him to you? Whether she meant Cadsuane or the Ashaman was unclear, perhaps even to her. I think that it will, Cadsuane said calmly, and Elias sagged like a stringless puppet. Shocked as they were by the display of channeling, questioning looks passed between the other councils. Eyes darted toward Elias, faces firmed, nods were exchanged. Cadsuane drew a deep breath. She had promised the boy that whatever she did would be for his good, not the good of the tower or anyone else's. And now she had broken a good woman for his good. "I'm very sorry, Elise," she said. "You are building up a large account already, boy," she thought.
Chapter 35. With the Chordan Call. Rand rode across the wide stone bridge leading north from the Camelin Gate without looking back. The sun was a pale golden ball just risen above the horizon in a cloudless sky, but the air was cold enough to mist his breath, and the lake winds made his cloak fly about. He did not feel the chill, though, except as something distant and not really connected to him. He was colder than any winter could be. The guards who had come to take him out of the cell the night before had been surprised to find him wearing a small smile. He wore it still, a slight curve of his mouth. Nynaeve had healed his bruises using the last of the Sayadar in her belt, yet the helmeted officer who came into the road at the foot of the bridge, a stocky man with blunt features, gave a start at the sight of him, as though his face was still swollen and purple. Cadsuane leaned from her saddle to speak a few quiet words and hand the officer a folded paper. He frowned at her, began to read, then jerked his head up to stare in amazement at the men and women waiting patiently on their horses behind her. Starting again at the top of the page, he read, moving his lips silently, as if he wanted to be sure of every word, and small wonder. Signed and sealed by all 13 councils, the order said that there was to be no checking of peace bonds, no search of the pack horses. This party's names were to be blotted out completely in the record books, and the order itself burned. They had never come to Far Madding. No Aes Sedai, no Otha Mier, none of them. "It's over, Rand," Min said gently, moving her sturdy brown mare nearer to his gray gelding, though she already stayed as close to him as Nynaeve did to Lan. Lan's bruises and a broken arm had been healed before she had attended to Rand. Min's face reflected the worry flowing through the bond. Letting her cloak go on the wind, she patted his arm. "You don't have to think about it anymore. I'm grateful to Far Madding, Min." His voice was emotionless, distant, as it had been when he seized Sayadine in the early days. He would have warmed it for her, but that seemed beyond him. "I really did find what I needed here. If a sword had memory, it might be grateful to the forge fire, but never fond of it." When they were waved through, he cantered the gray up the hard-packed dirt road and into the hills, and he did not so much as glance back until trees hid any sight of the city. The road climbed and wound through forested winter hills, where only pine and leatherleaf showed green, and most branches were stark and gray. Suddenly, the source was there again, seemingly just beyond the corner of his eye. It pulsed and beckoned and filled him with hunger like starvation. Without thought, he reached out and filled the emptiness in himself with Sayadine, an avalanche of fire, a storm of ice, all lauded with the filthy taint that made the larger wound in his side pulse. He swayed in the saddle as his head spun and his stomach clenched, even as he fought to ride the avalanche that tried to sear his mind, to soar on the storm that tried to scour his soul. There was no forgiveness or pity in the male half of the power. A man fought it or died. He could feel the 3 Ashaman behind him filling themselves too, drinking at Sayadine like men just out of the waste who had found water. In his head, Lews Therin sighed with relief. Min reined her mount so close to him that their legs touched. "Are you all right?" she said worriedly. "You look ill." "I'm as well as rainwater," he told her, and the lie was not just about his belly. He was steel, and to his surprise, still not hard enough. He had intended sending her to Camelin with Olivia to protect her. If the golden-haired woman was going to help him die, he had to be able to trust her. He had planned his words, but looking into Min's dark eyes, he was not hard enough to make his tongue form them. Turning the gray in among the bare-branched trees, he spoke to Cadsuane over his shoulder. This is the place. She followed him, of course. They all did. Arena had barely let him out of her sight long enough to sleep a few hours last night. He would have left her behind, but on that subject, Cadsuane had given him her first advice. You made a bargain with them, boy, the same as signing a treaty, or giving your word. Keep it or tell them it's broken, otherwise you are just a thief. Blunt, to the point, and in tones that left no doubt as to her opinion of thieves. He had never promised to follow her counsel, but she was too reluctant about being his advisor at all for him to risk driving her away this soon. So the Wave Mistress and the 2 other sea folk rode with Olivia, ahead of Varen and the other 5 Aes Sedai who had sworn to him, and the 4 who were Cadsuane's companions. She would as soon leave him as them, he was certain, maybe sooner. To other eyes than his, nothing distinguished the place where he had dug before going into Farmatting. To his eyes, a thin shaft that shone like a lantern rose through the damp mulch on the forest floor. Even another man who could channel could have walked through that shaft without knowing it was there. He did not bother to dismount. Using flows of air, he ripped aside the layer of rotting leaves and twigs and shoveled away damp earth until he uncovered a long, narrow bundle tied with leather cords. Clods of dirt clung to the wrapping cloth as he floated Kalendor to his hand. He had not dared carry that to Farmatting. Without a scabbard, he would have had to leave it at the bridge fortress, a dangerous flag waiting to announce his presence. It was unlikely there was another sword made of crystal to be found in the world, and too many people knew that the Dragon Reborn had one. And leaving it here, he had still ended up in a dark, cramped stone box under the... No. That was done and over. Over. Lews Therin panted in the shadows of his mind. Thrusting Kalendor under his saddle girth, he reined the gray around to face the others. The horses held their tails tight against the wind, but now and then one stamped a foot or tossed its head, impatient to be moving again after so long in the stable. The leather script that hung from Nynaeve's shoulder looked incongruous with all the begemmed tir'angreal she wore. Now that the time was near, she was stroking the bulging script, apparently without realizing what she was doing. She was trying to hide her fear, but her chin trembled. Cadsuane was looking at him impassively. Her cowl had fallen down her back, and sometimes a gust stronger than most swayed the golden fish and birds, stars and moons, dangling from her bun. I'm going to remove the taint from the male half of the source, he announced. The 3 Ashaman, now in plain dark coats and cloaks like the other warders, exchanged excited glances, but a ripple passed through the Aes Sedai. Nissun let out a gasp that seemed too large for the slender, bird-like sister. Cadsuane's expression never altered. With what? She said, raising a skeptical eyebrow at the bundle beneath his leg. With the Cho'Dan Kal, he replied. That name was another gift from Lews Therin, resting in Rand's head as if it had always been there. You know them as immense statues, sa'angreal, one buried in Parian, the other on Tremalking. Arena's head jerked, making the golden medallions on her nose chain click together at the mention of the Sea Folk Island. They're too big to be moved with any ease.
This book's
But I
almost
have a pair
done
of
too.
tir'angreal called access keys. Using those, the Cho'Dan Kal can be tapped from anywhere in the world. Dangerous, Lews Therin moaned. Madness. Rand ignored him. For the moment, only Cadsuane mattered. Her bay flicked one black ear, and at that he seemed more excitable than his rider. One of those sa'angreal is made for a woman, she said coolly. Who do you propose to use that? Or do these keys allow you to draw on both yourself? Nynaeve will link with me.
And Conan,
He trusted Nynaeve,
I had to see if I could get a hold of a
but
Conan
no one
one.
else.
I might do a Conan
She was
one.
Aes Sedai, but she had been the wisdom of Emin's feet.
I think there might actually
He
be
had to trust her.
some Conan
She
ones
smiled at
on
him. and nodded firmly,
Liver
her
box,
chin
which
no
is,
longer trembling.
falls under public
Don't
domain.
try to stop me, Cadswing.
I'll have to
She
look.
said nothing, only studied him, dark eyes weighing and measuring. Forgive me, Cadswing. Humira broke into the silence, heeling her dapple forward. Young man, have you considered the possibility of failure? Have you considered the consequences of failure? I must ask the same question, Nassoon said sharply. She sat very straight in her saddle, and her dark eyes met Rand's gaze levelly. By everything I have read, the attempt to use those Sa'angreal may result in disaster. Together, they might be strong enough to crack the world like an egg. Like an egg, Lews Therin agreed. They were never tested, never tried. This is insane, he shrieked. You are mad, mad. The last I heard, Rand told the sisters, one Ashaman in 50 had gone mad and had to be put down like a rabid dog. More will have by now. There is a risk to doing this, but it's all maybe and might. If I don't try, the certainty is that more and more men will go mad. Maybe scores, maybe all of us. And sooner or later it will be too many to be killed easily. Will you enjoy waiting for the last battle with 100 rabid Ashaman wandering about? Or 200? Or 5? And maybe me, one of them? How long will the world survive that? He spoke to the two Browns, but it was Cadswain who he watched. Her almost black eyes never left him. He needed to keep her with him, but if she tried to talk him out of it, he would reject her advice no matter the consequences. If she tried to stop him, Saidin raged inside him. Will you do the deed here? She asked. In Shadar Logoth, he told her, and she nodded. A fitting place, she said, if we are to risk destroying the world. Lews Therin screamed, a dwindling howl that echoed inside Rand's skull as the voice fled into the dark depths. There was nowhere to hide, though. No safe place. The gateway he wove did not open into the ruined city of Shadar Logoth itself, but to a thinly wooded, uneven hilltop a few miles to the north, where the horse hooves rang on sparse, stony soil that had stunted the leafless trees, and ragged patches of snow covered the ground. As Rand dismounted, his eye was caught by distant glimpses of the place once called Aridhol, showing above the trees, towers that ended abruptly in jagged stone, and white onion-shaped domes that could have sheltered a village had they been whole. He did not look for long. Despite the clear morning sky, those pale domes failed to gleam as they should, as if something cast a shadow over the sprawling ruin. Even at this distance from the city, the second never-healing wound in his side had begun to throb faintly. The slash given by Padan Fain's dagger, the dagger that had come from Shadar Logoth, did not beat together with the pulsing of the larger wound it cut across, but rather against it, alternating. Cadswain took charge, issuing brisk commands, as might have been expected. One way or another, Aes Sedai always did, given half a chance, and Rand did not try to stop her. Lan and Nethin and Basaine rode down into the forest to scout. The other warders hurried to fasten the horses to low branches out of the way. Min stood up in her stirrups and pulled Rand's head to where she could kiss his eyes. Without speaking a word, she went to join the men with the horses. The bond surged with her love for him, with confidence and a trust so complete that he stared after her in amazement. Eben came to take Rand's mount, grinning from ear to ear. Together with his nose, those ears still seemed to make up half his face. But he was a slender youth rather than gawky now. It will be wonderful, channeling without the taint, my Lord Dragon, he said excitedly. Rand thought Eben might be as much as 17, but he sounded younger. That always makes me want to empty my belly, if I think on it. He trotted away with the gray, still grinning. The power roared in Rand, and the filth tarnishing the pure life of Saidin seeped into him, rank runnels that would bring madness and death. Cadsuane gathered the Aes Sedai around her, and Olivia and the Sea Folk Windfinder, too. Arena grumbled loudly about being excluded until a finger pointed by Cadsuane sent her stalking across the hilltop. Moad, in his odd blue quilted coat, sat Arena down on an outcrop and talked soothingly, though sometimes his eyes went to the surrounding trees, and then he slid a hand along the long ivory hilt of his sword. Jahar appeared from the direction of the horses, stripping the cloth wrappings from Kalandor. The crystal sword, with its long clear hilt and slightly curving blade, sparkled in the pale sunlight. At an imperious gesture from Maurice, he quickened his step to join her. Dog was in that group too, and Eben. Cadsuane had not asked to use Kalandor. That could pass. For now, it could. That woman could try a stone's patience, Nynaeve muttered, striding up to Rand. With one hand she held the script's strap firmly on her shoulder, while the other was just as firmly around the thick braid hanging from her cowl. To the pit of doom with her, that's what I say. Are you sure Min couldn't be wrong just this once? Well, I suppose not. But still, will you stop smiling like that? You'd make a cat nervous. We might as well begin, he told her, and she blinked. Shouldn't we wait on Cadsuane? No one would suspect she had been complaining about the Aes Sedai a moment earlier. If anything, she sounded anxious not to upset her. She will do what she will do, Nynaeve. With your help, I will do what I must. Still, she hesitated, clutching the script to her chest and casting worried glances in the direction of the women gathered around Cadsuane. Olivia left that group and hurried toward them across the uneven ground, holding her cloak closed with both hands. Cadsuane says I must have the ter'angreal, Nynaeve, she said in a soft Shunshan drawl. Now don't argue. It isn't time. Besides, they are no good to you if you're going to be linked to him. This time the look Nynaeve directed toward the women around Cadsuane was near murderous. She stripped off rings and bracelets, muttering under her breath, and handed the jeweled belt and necklace to Olivia as well. After a moment, she sighed and unfastened the peculiar bracelet connected to finger rings by flat chains. You might as well take this, too. I don't suppose I need an Angreal if I'm going to be using the most powerful sa'angreal ever made. But I want them all back, understand? She finished fiercely. I am not a thief, the hawk-eyed woman told her primly, slipping the 4 rings over the fingers of her left hand. Strangely, the Angreal that fitted Nynaeve so well fit on her longer hand just as easily. The 2 women both stared at the thing. It came to him then that neither of them acknowledged any possibility that he might fail here. He wished he could be as certain. What had to be done, though. Are you going to wait all day, Rand? Nynaeve asked when Olivia set off back to Cadsuane, even more quickly than she had come. Smoothing her cloak under her, Nynaeve sat down on an upthrust gray stone the size of a small bench, pulled the script onto her lap, and flipped back the leather flap. Rand folded himself to the ground cross-legged in front of her, and she produced the 2 access keys, smooth white statues, a foot tall, each holding a clear sphere in one upraised hand. The figure of a bearded man in robes she handed to him. That of a robed woman she set on the ground at her feet. The faces on those figures were serene and strong and wise with years. You must put yourself right on the edge of embracing the source, she told him, smoothing her skirts that did not need smoothing. Then I can link with you. With a sigh, Rand put down the bearded man and released Sayadin. Raging fire and cold vanished, and the grease-slick vileness of the taint. And with them, life seemed to dwindle too, turning the world pale and drab. He placed his hands on the ground beside him against the sickness that would strike when he took hold of the source again, but a different dizziness suddenly spun his head. For a heartbeat, a vague face filled his eyes, blotting out Nynaeve, a man's face, almost recognizable. despite if that ever happened while he was actually grabbing hold of Saidin. Nynaeve bent toward him, concern on her face. "Now," he said, and reached for the source through the bearded man. Reached, but did not seize it. He hung on the brink, wanting to howl with the agony as flickering flames seemed to broil him even while shrieking winds blasted particles of frozen sand across his skin. Watching Nynaeve take a quick breath, he knew it lasted only an instant, yet it seemed he endured for hours before Saidin flowed through him, all the molten fury and icy tumbling, all the foulness, and he could not control a hair-thin thread. He could see the flow from him into Nynaeve. To feel it seething through him, feel the treacherous tides and shifting ground that could destroy him in a heartbeat, to feel that without being able to fight or control was an agony in itself. He was aware of her, he realized suddenly, in much the same way he was aware of Min. But all he could think of was Saidin, flooding through him uncontrolled. She drew a shuddering breath. "How can you stand that?" she said hoarsely. "All chaos and rage and death. Light. Now you must try as hard as you can to control the flows, while I..." Desperate to gain his balance in that never-ending war with Saidin, he did as she said, and she yelped and jumped. "You were supposed to wait until I..." she began in angry tones, then went on in a merely irritated voice. "Well, at least what are you so wide-eyed about? I'm the one had her skin yanked off." "Sayadar," he murmured in wonder. It was so different. Alongside the turmoil of Saidin, Sayadar was a tranquil river flowing smoothly. He dipped into that river, and suddenly he was struggling against currents that tried to pull him further in, swirling whirlpools that tried to yank him under. The harder he struggled, the stronger the shifting fluxes grew. Only an instant since he had tried to control Sayadar, and already he felt as if he was drowning in it, being swept away into eternity. Nynaeve had warned him what he must do, but it seemed so foreign he had not truly believed until now. With an effort, he forced himself to stop fighting the currents, and as quickly as that, the river was tranquil once more. That was the first difficulty, to fight Saidin while surrendering to Saidar. The first difficulty and the first key to what he had to do. The male and female halves of the true source were alike and unalike, attracting and repelling, fighting against each other even as they worked together to drive the wheel of time. The taint on the male half had its opposite twin too. The wound given him by Ishamael throbbed in time with the taint, while the other, from Fane's blade, beat counterpoint in time with the evil that had killed Aradol. Awkwardly forcing himself to work gently, to use the unfamiliar Saydar's own immense strength to guide it as he wanted, he wove a conduit that touched the male half of the source at one end, and the distantly seen city at the other. The conduit had to be of untainted Sayadar. If this worked as he hoped, a tube of Saidin might shatter when the taint began to leach out of it. He thought of it as a tube at least, though it was not. The weave did not form at all as he expected it to. As if Sayadar had a mind of its own, the weave took on convolutions and spirals that made him think of a flower. There was nothing to see, no grand weaves seeping down from the sky. The source lay at the heart of creation. The source was everywhere, even in Shadar Logoth. The conduit covered distance beyond his imagining. It had no length at all. It had to be a conduit, no matter its appearance. If it was not...
Cheers.
Drawing on Saidin, fighting it, mastering it in the deadly dance he knew so well, he forced it into the flowery weave of Sayadar. And it flowed through. Saidin and Sayadar, like and unlike, could not mix. The flow of Saidin squeezed in on itself, away from the surrounding Sayadar. The Sayadar pushed it from all sides, compressing it further, making it flow faster. Pure Saidin, pure except for the taint, touched Shadar Logoth. Rand frowned. Had he been wrong? Nothing was happening. Except the wounds in his side seemed to be throbbing faster. Amid the firestorm and icy fury of Saidin, it seemed that the foulness stirred and shifted. Just a slight movement that might have escaped notice had he not been straining to find anything. A slight stirring in the midst of chaos, but all in the same direction. Go on, Nynaeve urged. Her eyes were bright, as though just having Saidar flow in her was enough for joy. He drew more deeply on both halves of the source, strengthening the conduit as he forced more of Saidin into it. Drew on the power until nothing he did would bring more. He wanted to shout at how much was flowing into him, so much that it seemed he did not exist anymore. Only the one power. He heard Nynaeve groan, but the murderous struggle with Saidin consumed him.
Fingering the great serpent ring on her left forefinger, Elsa stared at the man she had sworn to serve. He sat on the ground, grim-faced, staring straight ahead as if he could not see the wilder Nynaeve sitting right in front of him, glowing like the sun. Perhaps he could not. She could feel Saidar sweeping through Nynaeve in torrents undreamed of. All the sisters of the tower combined could have wielded only a fraction of that ocean. She envied the wilder that, and at the same time she thought she might have gone mad from the sheer joy of it. Despite the cold, there were beads of sweat on Nynaeve's face. Her lips were parted, and her wide eyes stared rapturously beyond the Dragon Reborn. "It will begin soon, I fear," Cadsuane announced. Turning away from the seated pair, the gray-haired sister planted her hands on her hips and swept a piercing gaze across the hilltop. "They'll be feeling that in Tar Valon, and maybe on the other side of the world. Everyone to your places." "Come, Elsa," Maurice said, the light of Saidar suddenly around her. Elsa allowed herself to be drawn into a link with the stern-faced sister, and she flinched when Maurice added her Ashaman warder to the circle. He was darkly beautiful, but the crystal sword in his hands shone with a faint light, and she could feel the incredible seething tumult that must be Saidin. Even though Maurice was controlling the flows, the vileness of Saidin turned Elsa's stomach. It was a midden heap, rotting in a sweltering summer. The other green was a lovely woman in spite of her sternness, but her mouth thinned, as if she too were struggling not to vomit. All around the hilltop the circles were forming, Serene and Coreel linked with the old man Flynn, and Nasuna, Beldine, and Daigyan with the boy Hoplo. Varen and Kumira even made a circle with the sea folk wilder. She was actually quite strong, and everyone had to be used. As soon as each of those circles formed, it moved off the hilltop, each vanishing among the trees in a different direction. Olivia, the very peculiar wilder who seemed to have no other name, strode off north, cloak flapping behind her, surrounded by the glow of the power. A very troubling woman with those tiny lines around her eyes, and incredibly strong. Elsa would have given a great deal to have her hands on those ter'angreal the woman wore. Olivia and the three circles would provide an encircling defense, if it were needed. But the greatest need lay right there on the hilltop. The Dragon Reborn must be protected at all costs. That job Cadsuane had taken on herself, of course, but Maurice's circle would remain there too. Cadsuane must have had an angreal of her own, from the amount of Saidar she was drawing, more than Elsa and Maurice combined, yet even that paled beside the power that flowed through Kalandor. Elsa glanced toward the Dragon Reborn and drew a deep breath. "Maurice, I know I shouldn't ask, but may I meld the flows?" She expected to have to plead, but the taller woman hesitated only a moment before nodding and passing control to her. Almost immediately, Maurice's mouth softened, though it could never be called soft. Fire and ice and filth welled up in Elsa, and she shuddered. Whatever the cost, the Dragon Reborn had to reach the last battle. Whatever the cost.
Riding his horse down the snowy road to Monsian, Barlow wondered whether old Magdalen, the Nine Rings, would pay what he wanted for the plum brandy in the cart behind him. He was not sanguine, She was tight with Silver, Magdalene was. The brandy was not very good, and this late in the winter she might be willing to wait until spring to get better. Suddenly he realized that the day seemed very bright, almost like summer noon instead of a winter morning. Strangest of all, the glow seemed to be coming from the huge pit beside the road where workmen from the city had been digging away until the previous year. There was supposed to be a monstrous statue down there, but he had never been interested enough to actually look for himself. Now, almost against his will, he reined in his stout mare and climbed down into the snow to trudge to the brink of the pit. It was 100 paces deep and 10 times as far across, and he had to put his hands in front of his face against the blinding glare that came from the bottom. Squinting through his fingers, he could make out a glowing ball, like a second sun. Abruptly, it came to him that this must be the one power. With a strangled yell, he lumbered back through the snow to his cart and scrambled up, flailing Nisa with the reins to get her moving even as he was trying to jerk her head around to head back to his farm. He was going to stay in his own house and drink that brandy himself. All of it.
Strolling lost in thought, Timna barely saw the fallow fields that covered all the hillsides but one around her. Tremalking was a large island, and this far from the sea, the wind carried no hint of salt. Yet it was the Ata Anmier that troubled her. They refused the waterway, yet Timna was one of the guides chosen to protect them from themselves, if possible. That was very difficult now, with them all in an uproar over this Coromor of theirs. Very few remained on the island. Even the governors, always fretting at being away from the sea as the Ata Anmier did, had set sail to search for him in any craft they could find. Suddenly, the one unplowed hill caught her eye. A great stone hand stuck out of the ground, clasping a clear sphere as large as a house, and that sphere was shining like a glorious summer sun. All thoughts of the Ata Anmier gone, Timna gathered her cloak and sat down on the ground, smiling to think that she might see the fulfillment of prophecy and the end of illusion. "If you truly are one of the chosen, I will serve you," the bearded man in front of Sindane said doubtfully, but she did not hear what else he had to say. She could feel it. That much of Saidar being drawn to one spot was a beacon that any woman in the world who could channel would feel and locate. So he had found a woman to use the other access key. She would have faced the Great Lord, faced the Creator with him. She would have shared the power with him, let him rule the world at her side. And he had spurned her love. Spurned her! The fool babbling at her was an important man, as such things were accounted here and now, but she did not have time to make certain of his trustworthiness, and without that she could not leave him to babble, not when she could feel Muradin's hand caressing the Kursuvra that held her soul. A razor-thin flow of air sliced the fellow's beard in two as it took off his head. Another flow shoved the body backward, so the blood fountaining from the stub of his neck did not spot her dress. Before body or head hit the stone floor, she had spun her gateway, a beacon she could point to, beckoning her. As she stepped into rolling forest where scattered carpets of snow littered the ground beneath stark branches, bare save for the thick ropes of drooping brown vines, she wondered where the beacon had drawn her. It did not matter. South of her, that beacon shone, enough Saidar to lay waste to a continent in one blow. He would be there, him and whoever the woman was he had betrayed her with. Carefully she drew on the power to spin a web for his death. Lightning such as Catherine had never seen streaked down from the cloudless sky. Not jagged bolts, but lances of silver blue that struck at the hilltop where she stood, and struck instead the inverted shield she had woven, erupting with a deafening roar 50 feet above her head. Even within the shield the air crackled, and her hair stirred and lifted. Without the aid of the Angreal that looked a little like a shrike dangling from her bun, she would not have been able to hold the shield up. A second golden bird, a swallow, hung from her hand by its thin chain. "There," she said, pointing in the direction it seemed to be flying. A pity she could not say how far away the power had been channeled, or whether by a man or a woman, but the direction would have to do. She hoped there would be no mishaps. Her people were out there, too. If the warning came with an attack, though, there could not be much doubt. As soon as the single word left her mouth, a fountain of flame erupted in the forest to the north, and then another and another, a staggering line racing northward. Kalandor shone like a flame in young Jahar's hands. Surprisingly, from the intensity on Elza's face and the way she gripped her skirts in fists, she was the one directing those flows. Maurice took a fistful of the boy's black hair and gently shook his head. "Steady, my pretty," she murmured. "Oh, steady, my lovely strong one." He smiled at her, a ravishing smile. Catherine shook her own head slightly. Understanding any sister's relationship with her warder was difficult, especially among Greens, but she could not begin to fathom what passed between Maurice and her boys. Her real attention was on another boy, though. Nynaeve was swaying, groaning with the ecstasy of such an unbelievable mass of Saidar flooding through her, but Rand sat like a stone, sweat rolling down his face. His eyes were blank, like polished sapphires. Was he even aware of what was happening around him? The swallow turned on its chain beneath her hand. "There," she said, pointing toward the ruins of Shadar Logoth.
Rand could not see Nynaeve any longer. He could not see anything, feel anything. He swam in surging seas of flame, scrambled across collapsing mountains of ice. The taint flowed like an ocean tide, trying to sweep him away. If he lost control for an instant, it would strip away everything that was him and carry that down the conduit too. As bad, or maybe worse, despite the tide of filth flooding through that odd flower, the taint on the male half of the source seemed no less. It was like oil floating on water in a coating so thin you would not notice till you touched the surface. Yet covering the vastness of the male half, it was an ocean in itself. He had to hold on. He had to. But for how long? How long could he hold on? If he could undo what Althor had done at the source, Demandred thought as he stepped through his gateway into Shadar Logoth, undo it sharply and suddenly, that might well kill the man, or at least sear the ability to channel out of him. He had reasoned out what Althor's plan had to be as soon as he realized where the access key was. A brilliant scheme, he did not mind admitting, however insanely dangerous. Lews Therin had always been a brilliant planner too, if not so brilliant as everyone made out. Not nearly as brilliant as Demandred himself. One look at the rubble-strewn street changed his mind about altering anything, though. Beside him rose half a pale dome, its shattered top 200 feet or more above the street, and above it, the sky held the light of mid-morning. From the broken rim of the ruin down to the street, though, the air was dark with shadows, as if night were already falling. The city quivered. He could feel it through his boots. Fire erupted in the forest. Great explosions spun of Sayadine that hurled trees into the air on gouts of flame that sped toward him. But he was already weaving a gateway. Leaping through, he let it vanish and ran through the vine-draped trees as hard as he could, plowing through patches of snow, stumbling over rocks hidden in the mulch, but not slowing down. Never that. The web had been reversed for caution's sake, but so had the first, and he had been a soldier. Still running, he heard the explosions he expected, and knew they were racing toward where his gateway had been, as surely as they had raced straight toward him among the ruins. They were far enough from him now to present no danger, though. Without slowing, he turned toward the access key. With the amount of Sayadine pouring through it, there might as well have been a fiery arrow in the sky pointing to Althor. So, unless someone in this accursed age had discovered yet another unknown ability, Althor must have acquired a device, a Tirangrial, that could detect a man channeling. From what he knew of what people now called the Breaking, after he himself had been imprisoned at Shale Ghul, any woman who knew how to make Tirangrial would have been trying to create one that would do that. In war, the other side always came up with something you did not expect, and you had to counter it. He'd always been good at war. First, he needed to get closer. Suddenly, he saw people off to the right ahead of him through the trees and sheltered behind a rough gray trunk. A bald-headed old man with a fringe of white hair was limping along between two women, one of them beautiful in a wild way, the other stunning. What were they doing in these woods? Who were they? Friends of Althor, or just people in the wrong place at the wrong time? He hesitated to kill them, whoever they were. Any use of the power would warn Althor. He would have to wait until they passed. The old man's head was turning as if he were searching for something among the trees, but Demandred doubted a fellow that decrepit could see very far. Abruptly, the old man stopped and thrust out his hand straight toward Demandred. Demandred found himself frantically fending off a net of Sayadine that struck his warding much harder than it should have, as hard as his own spinning wood. That tottering old man was an Ashaman, and at least one of the women must be what passed for Aes Sedai in this time, and joined with the fellow in a ring. He tried to launch his own attack and crush them, but the old man flung web after web at him without pause, and it was all he could do to fend them off. Those that struck trees enveloped them in flame or blew the trunks apart in splinters. He was a general, a great general, but generals did not have to fight alongside the men they commanded. Snarling, he began to retreat amid the crackle of burning trees and the thunder of explosions, away from the key. Sooner or later, the old man had to tire, and then he could take care of killing Althor, if one of the others did not get there first. He hoped fervently they did not.
Skirts hiked to her knees, cursing, Sindane ran from her third gateway as soon as she was through. She could hear the explosions marching toward the site, but this time she had realized why they came straight for her. Tripping on vines hidden in the snow, bumping into tree trunks, she ran. She hated forests. At least some of the others were here. She had seen those fountaining fires speed elsewhere than at her. She could feel Saidar being spun at more than one place, spun with fury, but she prayed to the Great Lord that she would reach Luz Theron first. She wanted to see him die, she realized, and for that, she would have to get closer.
Crouching behind a fallen log, Osangar panted from the exertion of running. Those months masquerading as Corlan Dashiva had not made him any fonder of exercise. The explosions that had almost killed him died away, then started up again somewhere in the distance. He cautiously raised himself enough to peek over the log. Not that he supposed a piece of wood was very much protection. He had never been a soldier, not really. His talents, his genius lay elsewhere. The Trollocs were his making, and thus the Myrddraal that had sprung from them, and many other creatures that had rocked the world and made his name famous. The access key blazed with Sayadine, but he could feel lesser amounts being wielded too, in various directions. He had expected others of the Chosen to be here ahead of him, had hoped they might have finished the task before he arrived, but plainly they had not. Plainly Althor had brought along some of those Ashaman, and by the amount of Sayadine that had gone into the eruptions that targeted him, Kalendor as well. And maybe some of his tame so-called Aes Sedai. Crouching again, he bit his lip. This forest was a very dangerous place, more so than he had expected, and nowhere for a genius. But the fact remained that Moradin terrified him. The man had always terrified him from the very beginning. He had been mad with power before they were sealed into the Bore, and since they had been freed, he seemed to think that he was the Great Lord. Moradin would find out somehow if he fled, and kill him. Worse, if Althor succeeded, the Great Lord might decide to kill both of them, and Osangar as well. He did not care whether they died, but he did very much about himself. He was not good at judging time by the sun, but it was obviously still short of noon. Hauling himself from the ground, he dabbed at the dirt on his clothes, then gave up in disgust and began to skulk from tree to tree in what he imagined was a stealthy manner. It was toward the key that he skulked. Perhaps one of the others would finish the man before he got close to it. But if not, perhaps he would find the chance to be a hero. Carefully, of course.
Varen frowned at the apparition making its way through the trees off to her left. She could think of no other term for a woman walking through the forest in gems and a gown that shifted through every color from black to white and sometimes even turned transparent. She was not hurrying, but she was heading toward the hill where Rand was, and unless Varen was very much mistaken, she was one of the Forsaken. "Are we just going to watch her?" Shallan whispered furiously. She had been upset that she was not the one to meld the flows, as if a wilder's strength counted with Aes Sedai, and hours tramping through the woods had not improved her temper. "We must do something," Kumira said softly, and Beren nodded. "I was just deciding what." A shield, she decided. A captive Forsaken might prove very useful. Using the full strength of her circle, she wove her shield and watched aghast as it rebounded. The woman was already embracing Saidar, though no light shone around her, and she was immensely strong. Then she had no time for thought of anything, as the golden-haired woman spun around and began channeling. Varen could not see the weaves, but she knew when she was fighting off an attack on her life, and she had come too far to die here.
Eben hitched his cloak around himself and wished he were better at ignoring the cold. Simple cold he could ignore, but not the wind that had sprung up since the sun passed its zenith. The three sisters linked to him simply let the wind take their cloaks as they tried to watch every direction at once. Dagion was leading the circle because of him, he thought, but she was drawing so lightly that he felt barely a whisper of Saidin passing through him. She would not want to face that until she had to. He lifted her cowl back into place on her head, and she smiled at him from its depths. The bond carried her affection to him, and his own back, he supposed. With time, he thought he might come to love this little Aes Sedai. The torrent of Saidin far behind him had a tendency to wash out his awareness of other channeling, but he could feel others wielding the power. The battle had been joined elsewhere, and so far, all the four of them had done was walk. He did not mind that much, really. He had been at Dumai's Wells and fought the Seanchan, and he had learned that battles were more fun in a book than in the flesh. What did irk him was that he had not been given control of the circle. Of course, Jahar had not, but he figured Maurice amused herself by making Jahar balance a cookie on his nose. Dahmer had been given control of that circle, though. Just because the man had a few years on him, well, more than a few, he was older than Evans Da, was no reason for Cadsuane to look at him as if he were a... "Can you help me? I seem to have lost my way, and my horse." The woman who stepped from behind a tree ahead of them did not even have a cloak. Instead, she wore a gown of deep green silk cut so low that half of her lush bosom was exposed. Waves of black hair surrounded a beautiful face, with green eyes that sparkled as she smiled. "A strange place to be riding," Beldine said suspiciously. The pretty green had not been pleased when Cadsuane put Dagion in charge, and she had taken every opportunity to state her opinion of Dagion's decisions. "I hadn't meant to ride so far," the woman said, coming closer. "I see you're all Aes Sedai. With a groom? Do you know what all the commotion is about?" Suddenly, Eben felt the blood drain from his face. What he felt was impossible. The green-eyed woman frowned in surprise, and he did the only thing that he could. "She's holding Saidin!" he shouted, and threw himself at her as he felt Dagion draw deeply on the power.
Sindain slowed at the sight of the woman standing among the trees 100 paces ahead of her, a tall, yellow-haired woman who simply watched her come closer. The feel of battles being fought with the power in other places made her wary at the same time it gave her hope. The woman was plainly dressed in wool, but incongruously decked with gems as if she were a great lady. With Saidar in her, Sindain could see the faint lines at the corners of the woman's eyes. Not one of those who called themselves Aes Sedai, then. But who? And why did she stand there as if she would bar Sindain's way? It did not really matter. Channeling now would give her away, but she had time. The key still shone as a beacon of the power. Luz Theron still lived. No matter how fierce the other woman's eyes, a knife would do for her if she really thought she could be a bar. And just in case she proved to be what they called a wilder, Sindain prepared a small present for her. A reversed web she would not even see until it was too late. Abruptly, the light of Saidar appeared around the woman, but the ruddy ball of fire streaked from Sindain's hand. Small enough to escape detection, she hoped, but enough to burn a hole through this woman who... Just as it reached the woman, almost close enough to singe her garments, the web of fire unraveled. The woman did not do anything. The net simply came apart. Sindane had never heard of a ter'angreal that would break a web, but it must be that. Then the woman struck back at her, and she suffered her second shock. She was stronger than Sindane had been before the Aelfinn and the Eelfinn held her. That was impossible. No woman could be stronger. She must have an angreal too. Shock lasted only the time it took her to slice the other woman's flows. She did not know how to reverse them. Maybe that would be enough advantage. She would see Luz Theron die. The taller woman jerked as her cut flows snapped back into her, but even as she shifted her feet with the blow, she channeled again. Snarling, Sindane fought back, and the earth heaved beneath their feet. She would see him die. She would! The high hilltop was not very near to the access key, but even so, the key shone so brightly in Moghedin's head that she hungered for just a sip at that immense flow of Saidar. To hold so much, the thousandth part of so much, would be ecstasy. She hungered, but this wooded vantage was as near as she intended going. Only the threat of Muradin's hands caressing her Kursuvra had driven her to travel here at all, and she had delayed coming, prayed that it would be over before she was forced to. Always she had worked in secrecy, but she had had to flee an attack as soon as she arrived, and in widely separated places in the forest spread out before her, lightnings and fires woven of Saidar and others that must have been Saidin flashed and flared beneath the mid-afternoon sun. Black smoke rose in plumes from burning clumps of trees, and thunderous explosions rolled through the air. Who fought, who lived, who died were all matters of indifference to her, except that it would be pleasant if Sindane or Grendel perished, or both. Moghedin would not thrashing about in the middle of a battle. And if that were not bad enough, there was what stood beyond the shining key, an immense flattened dome of black in the forest, as though night had turned to stone. She flinched as a ripple passed across the dark surface and the dome heaved perceptibly higher. Madness to go any closer to that, whatever it was. Muradin would not know what she did here, or did not do. Retreating to the back of the hilltop, away from the shining key and the strange dome, she sat down to do what she had done so often in the past. Watch from the shadows. And survive.
Inside his head, Rand was screaming. He was sure that he was screaming, that Luz Theron was screaming. But he could not hear either voice in the roar. The foul ocean of the taint was flooding through him, howling with its speed. Tidal waves of vileness crashed over him. Raging gales of filth ripped at him. The only reason he knew that he still held the power was the taint. Saidin could be shifting, flaring, about to kill him, and he would never know. The putrid flood overwhelmed everything else, and he hung on by his fingernails to keep from being swept away on it. The taint was moving. That was all that counted now. He had to hold on.
What can you tell me, Min? Cadsuane kept her feet despite her weariness. Holding that shield through most of the day was enough to tire anyone. There had not been an attack on the hilltop for some time, and in fact it seemed the only active channeling she could sense was what Nynaeve and the boy were doing. Elza was pacing an endless circle around the crest of the hill, still linked to Maurice and Jahar, but there was nothing for her to do at the moment except scan the hills around them. Jahar was sitting on a stone with Kalundor shining faintly in the crook of his arm. Maurice sat on the ground beside him with her head on his knee, and he was stroking her hair. "Well, Min?" Cadsuane demanded. The girl looked up angrily from the depression in the stony ground where Tomas and Moad had bundled her and Harina. At least the men had sense enough to accept that they could not fight any part of this fight. Harina wore a sullen scowl, and more than once it had been necessary for one of the men to restrain Min from going to young Althor. They had actually had to take her knives away after she tried to use the blades on them. "I know he's alive," the girl muttered, "and I think he's hurting. Only if I can feel enough to think he's hurting, then he's in agony. Let me go to him." "You would only get in the way now." Ignoring the girl's frustrated groan, Cadsuane walked across the uneven grounds to where Rand and Nynaeve sat, but for a moment she did not look at them. Even at a distance of miles, the black dome looked immense, rearing 1,000 feet at its height. and it was swelling. The surface looked like black steel, though it did not sparkle in the afternoon sun. If anything, the light seemed to dim around it. Rand was sitting as he had since the beginning, an unmoving, unseeing statue with sweat rolling down his face. If he was in agony, as Min said, he showed no sign of it. And if he was, Cadsuane did not know what she could do, what she dared to do. Disturbing him now in any way might have dire consequences. Glancing at that rising, dead black dome, Cadsuane grunted. Having let him begin in the first place might have dire consequences, too. With a moan, Nynaeve slipped from her stone seat to the ground. Her dress was sodden with sweat, and strands of hair clung to her slick face. Her eyelids fluttered weakly, and her breasts heaved as she gulped air desperately. "No more," she whimpered. "I cannot stand any more." Cadsuane hesitated, something she was not accustomed to doing. The girl could not leave the circle until young al'Thor released her, but unless these Choedan Kal were flawed in the same way as Kalandor, she would be buffered against taking in enough of the power to damage her. Except that she was acting as a conduit for far more of saidar than the entire White Tower could have handled, using every angreal and sa'angreal the tower possessed. After having that flow through her for hours, simple physical exhaustion might be killing her. Kneeling beside the girl, Cadsuane laid the swallow on the ground beside her, took the girl's head in her hands, and lessened the amount of saidar she was putting into the shield. Her abilities with healing were no more than average, but she could wash away some of the girl's exhaustion at least without falling over herself. She was very conscious of the weakened shield over them, though, and she wasted no time in forming the weaves.
Scrambling to the top of the hill, Osengar dropped to the ground on his belly and smiled as he crept sideways to shelter behind a tree. From here, with saidin in him, he could see the next crest clearly, and the people on it. Not as many as he had expected. One woman was making a slow circuit around the crest, peering into the trees, but everyone else was still. Narishma, sitting with Kalandor glowing in his hands, and a woman's head on his knee. There were two other women that Osengar could see, one kneeling over the other, but they were obscured by a man's back. He did not need to see the man's face to know al'Thor. The key, lying on the ground at his side, named him. To Osengar's eyes it shone brightly. In his head it overwhelmed the sun, 1,000 suns. What he could do with that? A pity it had to be destroyed along with al'Thor. But still, he could take Kalandor after al'Thor was dead. No one else among the Chosen possessed so much as an angreal. Even Moradin would quail before him once he had that crystal sword. Nameless? Osengar would be named Nameless after he destroyed al'Thor and undid all that he had done here. Laughing softly, he wove balefire. Who would ever have thought that he would turn out to be the hero of the day?
Walking slowly, studying the forested hills around them, Elsa suddenly stopped as a flicker of movement caught the corner of her eye. She turned her head slowly, and not as far as the hill where she had seen that flash. The day had been very difficult for her. In her captivity among the Aiel tents at Cairhien, it had come to her that it was paramount for the Dragon Reborn to reach the last battle. It had suddenly become so blindingly obvious that it astounded her she had not seen it before. Now it was clear to her, as clear as saidar made the face of the man trying to hide on that hill while peeking around a tree trunk. Today she had been forced to fight the Chosen. Surely the Great Lord would understand if she had actually killed any of them, but Khorlan Dashiva was only one of those Ashaman. Dashiva raised his hand toward the hill where she stood, and she drew as hard as she could on Kalandor and Jahar's hands. saidin seemed well suited to destruction to her. A huge ball of coruscating fire surrounded the other hilltop, red and gold and blue. When it was gone, that other hill ended in a smooth surface, 50 feet lower than the old crest. Moghedien was not sure why she had remained this long. There could not be more than 2 hours of daylight left, and the forest was quiet. Except for the key, she could not feel saidar being channeled anywhere. That was not to say that someone was not using small amounts somewhere, but nothing like the fury that had raged earlier. The battle was over, the other chosen dead or flying in defeat. Plainly defeat, since the key still blazed in her head. Amazing that the Cho'odon Kal had survived continuous use for this long, at this level. Lying on her belly atop her high vantage point with her chin in her hands, she was watching the great dome. Black no longer seemed to describe it. There was no term for it now, but black was a pale color by comparison. It was half a ball now, rearing like a mountain 2 miles or more into the sky. A thick layer of shadow lay around it, as though it were sucking the last light out of the air. She could not understand why she was not afraid. That thing might grow until it enveloped the entire world, or perhaps shatter the world, as Arangar had said it might. But if that happened, there was no safe place, no shadows for the spider to hide in. Suddenly something writhed up from that dark, smooth surface, like a flame, if flames were blacker than black. Then another, until the dome boiled with Stygian fire. The roar of 10,000 thunders made her clap her hands over her ears and shriek, soundlessly in that crash, and the dome collapsed in on itself in the space of a heartbeat, to a pinpoint, to nothing. It was wind that howled then, rushing toward the vanished dome, dragging her along the stony ground, no matter how desperately she clawed for purchase, tumbling her against trees, lifting her into the air. Strangely, she still felt no fear. She thought if she survived this, she would never feel fear again. Cadsuane let the thing that had been a ter'angreal drop to the ground. It could no longer be called a statue of a woman. The face was as wisely serene as ever, but the figure was broken in two and lumpy like bubbled wax where one side had melted, including the arm that had held the crystal sphere, now lying in shattered fragments around the ruined thing. The male figure was whole and already tucked away in her saddlebags. Kalendor was secured too. It was best not to leave temptation on the open hilltop. Where Shadar Logoth had been, there was now a huge opening in the forest, perfectly round, and so wide that even with the sun low on the horizon, she could see the far side sloping down into the earth. Lan, leading his limping warhorse up the slope, dropped the black stallion's reins when he saw Nynaeve stretched out on the ground and covered to her chin with her cloak. Young Althor lay at her side, also blanketed in his cloak, with Min curled up against him, her head on his chest. Her eyes were closed, but by her small smile she was not asleep. Lan barely spared them a glance as he ran the last distance and fell on his knees to raise Nynaeve's head gently on his arm. She did not stir any more than the boy. "They are just unconscious," Cadsuane told him. "Coriel says it is better to let them recover on their own." And how long that might require, Coriel had not been prepared to say, nor had Dahmer. The wounds in the boy's side were unchanged, though Dahmer had expected they would be. It was all very disturbing. A little farther up the hill, the bald Ashaman was bent over a groaning Beldine, his fingers writhing just above her as he wove his strange healing. He had been busy the last hour. Olivia could not stop staring in wonder and flexing the arm that had been broken, as well as seared to the bone. Serene walked unsteadily, but that was just tiredness. She'd almost died out there in the forest, and her eyes were still wide with the experience. Whites were not used to that sort of thing. Not everyone had been so lucky. Varen and the sea folk woman were sitting beside the cloak-covered form of Kumira, their lips moving silently in prayers for her soul, and Nasuna was trying awkwardly to comfort a weeping Daigyan who cradled young Evan's corpse in her arms and rocked him like a baby. Greens were used to that sort of thing, but Cadsuane did not like losing 2 of her people in return for no more than a few singed Forsaken and 1 dead renegade. "It's clean," Jahar said softly yet again. This time Maurice was the one sitting, with his head resting in her lap. Her blue eyes were as stern as ever, but she stroked his black hair gently. "It's clean." Cadsuane exchanged looks with Maurice over the boy's head. Dahmer and Jahar both said the same thing. The taint was gone, but how could they be sure some scrap did not remain? Maurice had allowed her to link with the boy, and she could not feel anything like what the other Green had described. Yet how could they be certain? Saidin was so alien that anything could be hidden in that mad chaos. "I want to leave as soon as the rest of the warders return," she announced. There were too many questions for which she had no answers to suit her, but she had young Althor now, and she did not intend to lose him. Night fell. On the hilltop, the wind blew dust across the fragments of what had once been a ter'angreal. Below lay the tomb of Shadar Logoth, open to give the world hope. And on distant Tremalking, the word began to spread that the time of illusions was at an end. The end of the 9th book of the Wheel of Time.
We hope you've enjoyed Winter's Heart. Text copyright 2000.
Trying to see what you throw on for a little bit.
This is Audible. Audible Frontiers presents Homeland, written by R.A. Salvatore, narrated by Victor Bavini. Prelude. Never does a star grace this land with a poet's light of twinkling mysteries, nor does the sun send to here its rays of warmth and life. This is the Underdark, the secret world beneath the bustling surface of the Forgotten Realms, whose sky is a ceiling of heartless stone, and whose walls show the gray blandness of death in the torchlight of the foolish surface dwellers that stumble here. This is not their world, not the world of light. Most who come here uninvited do not return. Those who do escape to the safety of their surface homes return changed. Their eyes have seen the shadows and the gloom,
Winter's Heart's
the
done,
inevitable doom
and that
of the
was
Underdark. Dark corridors meander throughout the dark realm in winding courses, connecting caverns great and small with ceilings high and low. Mounds of stone as pointed as the teeth of a sleeping dragon leer down in silent threat, or rise up to block the way of intruders. There is a
that
silence
was
here,
book 9.
profound and foreboding, the crouched hush
And
of a
there's
predator
still-
at work. Too often, the only sound, the only reminder to travelers in the Underdark that they have not lost their sense of
That's
hearing
book 9, and
altogether,
there's
is a distant and
14
echoing drip
books.
of water, beating like the
Well, I'll
heart of
try
a
to
beast,
find
slipping through the silent
Conan
stones to the
one.
deep Underdark pools of chilled water. What lies beneath the still onyx surface of these pools, one can only guess.
Yes.
What secrets await the brave? What horrors await the foolish? Only the imagination can reveal, until the stillness is disturbed. This is the Underdark. There are pockets of life here, cities as great as many of those on the surface. Around any of the countless bends and turns in the gray stone, a traveler might stumble suddenly into the perimeter of such a city, a stark contrast to the emptiness of the corridors. These places are not havens, though. Only the foolish traveler would assume so. They are the homes of the most evil races in all the realms, most notably the Duergar, the Kuo-Toa, and the Drow. In one such cabin, 2 miles wide and 1,000 feet high, looms Menzoberranzan, a monument to the otherworldly and, ultimately, deadly grace that marks the race of Drow elves. Menzoberranzan is not a large city by Drow standards. Only
I'm gonna have to go
20,000
to,
dark elves reside there.
purchase a
Where,
book through
in ages
Audible.
past, there had been an empty
That's what
cavern
all
of
these
roughly
books
shaped
are. This is from
stalactites
my,
and stalagmites. Now stands artistry, row
what
after
you call
row
my
of carved
Audible
castles
account.
thrumming in a quiet glow of magic.
I have to see
The city is a perfection of form, where not a stone has been
which
left to
ones
its
I can
natural shape.
purchase.
This sense of order and control, however, is but a cruel facade, a deception hiding the chaos and vileness that rule the dark elves' hearts. Like their cities, they are a beautiful, slender, and delicate people, with features sharp and haunting. Yet the Drow are the rulers of this unruled world, the deadliest of the deadly, and all other races take cautious note of their passing. Beauty itself pales at the end of a dark elf's sword. The Drow are the survivors, and this is the Underdark, the Valley of Death, the land of nameless nightmares. Part 1. Station. Station. In all the world of the Drow, there is no more important word. It is the calling of our religion, the incessant pulling of hunger and heartstrings. Ambition overrides good sense, and compassion is thrown away in its face, all in the name of love, the Spider Queen. Ascension to power in Drow society is a simple process of assassination. The Spider Queen is a deity of chaos, and she and her high priestesses, the true rulers of the Drow world, do not look with ill favor upon ambitious individuals wielding poisoned daggers. Of course, there are rules of behavior. Every society must boast of these. To openly commit
I think I
murder or
found
wage
one.
war invites the pretense of justice, and penalties exacted in the name of Drow justice are merciless. To stick a dagger in the back of a rival during the chaos of a larger battle,
That's pretty
or in the
much
quiet shadows of an alley, however, is quite
because the
acceptable,
one that wrote
even applauded.
Conan is
Investigation is not
Robert
the forte
Howard,
of Drow justice. No
and
one
this one's
kills
his
enough to bar.
pretty much all the
Station is the
Conan
way of love,
that he
the
wrote.
ambition she bestows to further the chaos, to
I might
keep
have
her
to get
Drow
this one.
children along their appointed course of self-imprisonment. Children, pawns more likely, dancing dolls for the Spider Queen, puppets on the imperceptible but impervious strands of her web. All climb the Spider Queen's ladders. All hunt for her pleasure, and all fall to the hunters of her pleasure. Station is the paradox of the world of my people. The limitation of
found
our
one.
power within the hunger for
I
power
was gonna purchase
is
it
gained through
through
treachery
Audible.
and invites treachery against those who gain it. Those
It's not
most powerful
that bad.
Menzoberranzan spend their days watching over their shoulders,
As far
defending
as
against the
price goes,
daggers
it's
that will find their backs. Their deaths usually come from the front. Dries Doran.
36 hours, 35 hours, all
Menzoberranzan.
kinds of different ones.
To a surface dweller, he might have passed undetected only a foot away. The padded footfalls of his lizard mount were too light to be heard, and the pliable and perfectly crafted mesh armor that both rider and mount wore bent and creased with their movements, as well as if the suits had grown over their skin. Demon's lizard trotted along in an easy but swift gait, floating over the broken floor, up the walls, and even across the long tunnel's ceiling. Subterranean lizards, with their sticky and soft three-toed feet, were preferred mounts for just this ability to scale stone as easily as a spider. Crossing hard ground left no damning tracks in the lighted surface world, but nearly all of the creatures of the Underdark possessed infravision, the ability to see in the infrared spectrum. footfalls left heat residue that could easily be tracked if they followed a predictable course along the corridor's floor. Demon clamped tight to his cell as the lizard plodded along a stretch of the ceiling, then sprang out in a twisting descent to a point farther along the wall. Demon did not want to be trapped. He had no light to guide him, but he needed none. He was a dark elf, a drow, an ebon-skinned cousin of those sylvan folk who danced under the stars on the world's surface. To Dinan's superior eyes, which translated subtle variations of heat into vivid and colorful images, the Underdark was far from a lightless place. Colors all across the spectrum swirled before him in the stone of the walls and the floor, heated by some distant fissure or hot stream. The heat of living things was the most distinctive, letting the dark elf view his enemies in details as intricate as any surface dweller would find in brilliant daylight. Normally, Dinan would not have left the city alone. The world of the Underdark was too dangerous for solo treks, even for a drow elf. This day was different, though. Dinan had to be certain that no unfriendly drow eyes marked his passage. A soft blue magical glow beyond the sculpted archway told the drow that he neared the city's entrance, and he slowed the lizard's pace accordingly. Few used this narrow tunnel, which opened into Tir Bresh, the northern section of Menzo Berenzon devoted to the Academy, and none but the mistresses and masters, the instructors of the Academy, could pass through here without attracting suspicion. Dinan was always nervous when he came to this point. Of 100 tunnels that opened off the main cavern of Menzo Berenzon, this
I may
one was
not
the
have
best
to buy
guard.
those books. They're on
Beyond the archway,
Audible for
twin
free.
statues of gigantic spiders sat in
Some of my
quiet
Conan
defense.
books.
If an enemy crossed through,
They're free on
the
Audible
spiders would
or
animate
for
and
on
attack, and alarms would be
Librivox.
sounded
What's
throughout the
cool about
Academy.
that is
Dinan
those
dismounted,
fall
leaving
under
his lizard
public
clinging
domain.
comfortably to a wall at his chest level. He reached under the collar of his piwafu, his magical shielding cloak, and took out his neck purse. From this, Dinan produced the insignia of House Doerden, a spider wielding various weapons in each of its 8 legs, and emblazoned with the letters DN for Daernan Naashes Bernin, the ancient and formal name of House Doerden. "You will await my return," Dinan whispered to the lizard as he waved the insignia before him. As with all the drow elves, the insignia of House Doerden held several magical Driamas, one of which gave family members absolute control over the house pets. The lizard would obey unfailingly, holding its position as though it were rooted to the stone, even if a scurry rat, its favorite morsel, napped a few feet from its maw. Dinan took a deep breath and gingerly stepped to the archway. He could see the spiders leering down at him from their 15-foot height. He was a drow of the city, not an enemy, and could pass through any other tunnel unconcerned. But the Academy was an unpredictable place. Dinan had heard that the spiders often refused entry, viciously, even to uninvited drow. He could not be delayed by fears and possibilities, Dinan reminded himself. His business was of the utmost importance to his family's battle plans. Looking straight ahead, away from the towering spiders, he strode between them and onto the floor of Tir Bresh. He moved to the side and paused, first to be certain that no one lurked nearby, and to admire the sweeping view of Menzo Berenzon. No one, drow or otherwise, had ever looked out from this spot without a sense of wonder at the drow city.
Number
Tir
2 down.
Bresh was the highest point on the floor of the 2-mile cavern, affording a panoramic view to the rest of Menzo Berenzon. The cubby of the Academy was now holding only the 3 structures that comprised the drow school: Eric Tinolith, the spider-shaped school of Loth; Sorcer, the gracefully curving, many-spired tower of wizardry; and Melee Magvir, the somewhat plain pyramidal structure where male fighters learned their trade. Beyond Tir Bresh, through the ornate stalagmite columns that marked the entrance to the Academy, the cavern dropped away quickly and spread wide, going far beyond Dinan's line of vision to either side and farther back than his keen eyes could possibly see. The colors of Menzo Berenzon were threefold to the sensitive eyes of the drow. Heat patterns from various fissures and hot springs swirled about the entire cavern. Purple and red, bright yellow and subtle blue, crossed and merged, climbed the walls and stalagmite mounds, or ran off singularly in cutting lines against the backdrop of dim gray stone. More confined than these generalized and natural gradations of color in the infrared spectrum were the regions of intense magic, like the spiders Demon had walked between, virtually glowing with energy. Finally, there were the actual lights of the city, fairy fire and highlighted sculptures on the houses. The Drow were proud of the beauty of their designs, and especially ornate columns or perfectly crafted gargoyles were almost always limned in permanent magical lights. Even from this distance, Demon could make out House Baenor, first house of Menzo Berenstain. It encompassed 20 stalagmite pillars and half again that number of gigantic stalactites. House Baenor had existed for 5,000 years, since the founding of Menzo Berenstain, and in that time the work to perfect the house's art had never ceased. Practically every inch of the immense structure glowed in fairy fire, blue at the outlying towers and brilliant purple at the huge central dome. The sharp light of candles, foreign to the Underdark, glared through some of the windows of the distant houses. Only clerics or wizards would light the fires, Demon knew, as necessary pains in their world of scrolls and parchments. This was Menzo Berenstain, the city of Drow. 20,000 dark elves lived here, 20,000 soldiers in the army of evil. A wicked smile spread across Demon's thin lips when he thought of some of those soldiers who would fall this night. Demon studied Narvandale, the huge central pillar that served as the time clock of Menzo Berenstain. Narvandale was the only way the Drow had to mark the passage of time, in a world that otherwise knew no days and no seasons. At the end of each day, the city's appointed archmage cast his magical fires into the base of the stone pillar. There the spell lingered throughout the cycle, a full day on the surface, and gradually spread its warmth up the structure of Narvandale until the whole of it glowed red in the infrared spectrum. The pillar was fully dark now, cooled since the Guyamar's fires had expired. The wizard was even now at the base, Demon reasoned, ready to begin the cycle anew. It was midnight, the appointed hour. Demon moved away from the spiders and the tunnel exit and crept along the side of Tir Bresh, seeking the shadows of heat patterns in the wall, which would effectively hide the distinct outline of his own body temperature. He came at last to Sorcerre, the school of wizardry, and slipped into the narrow alley between the tower's curving base and Tir Bresh's outer wall. "Student or master?" came the unexpected whisper. "Only a master may walk out of house in Tir Bresh in the black death of Narvandale," Demon responded. A heavily robed figure moved around the arc of the structure to stand before Demon. The stranger remained in the customary posture of a master of the Drow Academy, his arms out before him and bent at the elbows, his hands tight together, one on top of the other in front of his chest. That pose was the only thing about this one that seemed normal to Demon. "Greetings, faceless one," he signaled in the silent hand code of the Drow, a language as detailed as the spoken word. The quiver of Demon's hands belied his calm face, though, for the sight of this wizard put him as far on the edge of his nerves as he had ever been. "Second boy Do'Urden," the wizard replied in a gestured code. "Have you my payment?" "You will be compensated," Demon signaled pointedly, regaining his composure in the first swelling bubbles of his temper. "Do you dare to doubt the promise of Malice Do'Urden, matron mother of Dairnin Na'ashes Baernin, 10th house of Menzo Berenstain?" The faceless one slumped back, knowing he had erred. "My apologies, second boy of House Do'Urden," he answered, dropping to one knee in a gesture of surrender. Since he had entered this conspiracy, the wizard had feared that his impatience might cost him his life. He had been caught in the violent throes of one of his own magical experiments, the tragedy melting away all of his facial features and leaving behind a blank hotspot of white and green goo. Matron Malice Do'Urden, reputedly as skilled as anyone in all the vast city in mixing potions and salves, had offered him a sliver of hope that he could not pass by. No pity found its way into Demon's callous heart, but House Do'Urden needed the wizard. "You'll get your salve," Demon promised calmly, "when Alton Devere is dead." "Of course," the wizard agreed. "This night?" Demon crossed his arms and considered the question. Matron Malice had instructed him that Alton Devere should die even as their family's battle commenced. That scenario now seemed too clean, too easy to do. The Faceless One did not miss the sparkle that suddenly brightened the scarlet glow in the young Do'Urden's heat-sensing eyes. "Wait for Narvandale's light to approach its zenith," Demon replied, his hands working through the signals excitedly, and his grimace seeming more of a twisted grin. "Should the doomed boy know of his house's fate before he dies?" the wizard asked, guessing the wicked intentions behind Demon's instructions. "As the killing blow falls," answered Demon, "let Alton Devere die without hope." Demon retrieved his mount and sped off down the empty corridors, finding an intersecting route that would take him in through a different entrance to the city proper. He came in along the eastern end of the great cavern, Menzo Baranzon's produce section, where no drow families would see that he had been outside the city limits, and where only a few unremarkable stalagmite pillars rose up from a flat stone. Demon spurred his mount along the banks of Donegal, the city's small pond, with its moss-covered island that housed a fair-sized herd of cattle-like creatures called Rothan. 100 goblins and orcs looked up from their herding and fishing duties to mark the drow soldiers' swift passage, knowing their restrictions as slaves.
Alright, everyone. I'm going to call Answer's Life for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe.